The following was recorded in front of a live studio audience at the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe. This is the United Podcast Network.
Welcome to the Quirky Dog Podcast, inspired by some of the quirkiest dogs you can ever imagine and the owners who love them. This podcast is brought to you by the quirky couple themselves, Scott and Jess Williams. Their aim is to educate and entertain. Here's Scott and Jess.
Welcome, guys, and happy Wednesday. As promised on last week's podcast, we do have an adorable golden puppy with us here today. This is Nellie. She is a 5-month-old golden retriever. And today's topic is going to be round 1 versus round 2, but it's not going to have anything to do with boxing or anything crazy like that. But first, we're going to start with the quirky tip of the day. All right. Oh, did you hear the piggy? All right. Our quirky tip this week, you guys, is if you are dealing with an abscess with your dog, typically what you need to do is drain the fluid out of the abscess. You will be directed by veterinarians to do this and everything else. My favorite way of prepping this whole situation is getting a washcloth wet, putting it in the microwave for like 30 seconds or so, and then it's nice and hot and it helps drain that fluid. We've been dealing with an abscess on an elbow with our dog Max, and my rat terrier Bammer had some anal gland abscesses before. So if you ever hear that you need to put a hot compress on, just get a washcloth wet and put it in the microwave, and then make sure it's cool enough that it can actually touch the dog's skin or hair or wherever you need to drain from. So this podcast came about because we trained these same owners, other golden, like 8 years ago or so?
At least.
Yeah, so
10 years ago.
And they had really good success with their other golden. They went to the same breeder, they went to the same trainers, and they thought, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So we had to bring Nellie on here today. And I do have to mention that I said that there were never any goldens in the studio, and then looking back, I realized that Megan Doyle's dog, Wicked, was here, and he was a golden. But we've never had a golden puppy before who's chewing my hands right now. So she's okay for a sec. So she is a super high energy puppy. We have had her now for, I don't know, a whole week. This is her week anniversary. And she's a lot. She's strong. She has 2 little kids at home, and she's given her mom and dad a run for their money.
Yeah, they were looking forward to dropping her off to boot camp, that's for sure. She's a very happy dog.
Yeah. But really, the main thing is that if you had success with your first dog and you thought it all went great, don't get another breed. Don't find another breeder. Don't go to other trainers. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, like I said to start with. All right, I am going to have you put her away just because of my finger. I got to be careful with Pinky Helmet, and she's moving it all around. So we're going to put her in a crate behind us because she's very accepting of her crate and happy about it. Good girl, baby. All right, perfect. The other flip side of this, you guys, is life changes sometimes, right? So this specific couple, when they had, their kids, the dog had already been trained. She was an older dog. Now they have 2 little kids, a little puppy. It doesn't look the same. The environment isn't the same. The whole setup is not the same as it was with round 1. So round 2 is going to look a little bit different. It's going to have some more challenges that present themselves. And you're going to have to kind of roll with the punches and figure out what is going to work this time. And just because you go to the same breeder with similar genetics does not mean you're going to get a similar dog. And, you just have to be prepared for these types of things. And we see this quite often where, a family's like, oh, we've had dogs our whole lives. Everything's great. But now all of a sudden they've retired. The kids aren't at school anymore and everything looks totally different. And the dog is acting totally different and everything else because their life circumstances have changed so drastically.
Well, in this case, they didn't have 2 little kids with the first dog. And
she was already trained. She was an adult and she was already trained.
What do you mean she was already trained? We had the dog in for training.
Yeah, but the kids were in the life, but the dog had already come in for training. She was
That's what I mean. They didn't have to deal with it when they were training the puppy.
Yeah.
So now they wound up all of a sudden having 3 puppies in the house. A 5 and 7-year-old and this puppy, and they're all playing with each other, and the puppy's biting them, and they're running around squealing, and it's just a little bit hectic.
Yeah, no, it can look a lot differently. But, the funniest thing to us is like somebody that shows up with a Bernese Mountain Dog, and, Scott will say like, oh, have you had this breed before? And people will say something like, no, we've had Yorkies our whole life. And then they just want to like switch things up. And I'm not saying that variety isn't sometimes welcome and the spice of life can sometimes present awesome opportunities and be great. You don't have to always stay within these patterns. But if you've had massive success in the past we would suggest, following a similar course that just kind of makes sense to us. It's just a logical way of thinking about things. And we so often hear with people, since we're balanced trainers, they're like, oh, I used, a pinch collar with my first dog, and I did all this with my first dog, and it worked out so great. And they're, going down this rabbit hole of food and positive training and, no aversives and life and whatever the heck we're calling everything nowadays. And then they start using, a balanced approach again, and they have the same sort of success. So don't get all wrapped up in, the modern day speak and everything else. If you had success with your dog and you felt good about how you trained your dog, continue on with those practices, and it may save you a lot of time and money with a professional trainer.
Yeah, a golden retriever is a great first dog for anybody. They're a happy dog. They're always happy. It's very unusual to get a golden with aggression issues. They're very trainable, and they just love people. So, it's really hard. If you can't handle a golden, then maybe, unless, it's an energy level thing, or if you're maybe an older couple and you just don't want a high energy dog at all, in that case, maybe a rescue would be better. Getting an adult dog that's a little bit older, that is, all that youthful energy is kind of behind it. But it's a nice, safe dog to introduce to a new family, a young family.
Yeah, but they can be strong, and they can have a lot of energy, and this puppy has a lot of energy. She's very strong. Luckily, we've been saying she has very, very little anxiety, and whether that be genetic or how she was raised or XYZ, we're not sure. The owners have been consistently crating since they brought her home. But, most of the time you walk into the room where she's crated and she's just like laying on her back, relaxing. But just because, a golden may not carry aggression issues and, some of the more scary type of stuff, they still can be strong dogs, and they still can get very out of hand when they don't have structure and rules and control. And this puppy is learning the ropes. She's starting to stay on a bed. She's quiet in her crate. She came out to the podcast studio here today. It's a very public environment. She's learning not to jump. She's starting to get on top of these things, but she's a very forward dog. She had never at any point since she's been dropped off has been like, oh, I'm not sure. I'm a little bit scared. She's always like ready to jump into the fire head first. And that's
she'd go home with anybody if we handed her off. She'd be like, all right, let's go.
Yeah. But, and that's just something to consider when you have a stronger dog, whether that means physical or mental or, spiritually strong, however you want to phrase that, you're just going to have to counter that with some strong criteria and some strong rules, because that's what they're looking for. They're looking for you to step up to the plate. So I think basically when we were kind of formulating this podcast, we just see it quite frequently. It's very rare that a young couple gets together, neither of them have ever had a dog before, and then they just decide, okay, we're going to get a dog and we're going to start this journey. There's normally some past history of, my mom and dad had labs the whole time I grew up, and XYZ. I will say one thing that is not always created equal is the rescue situation, and I'm not meaning to harp on rescues here, but a lot of people will say like, oh yeah, we adopted our first dog and, we went back to the shelter to adopt this dog. Well, rescue, there's a lot of variables there, right? Like what is going on behind the organization, what types of things they're screening for, obviously breed variety within a rescue situation. If you go to a breed-specific rescue, that's going to be a little bit different. But if round one you got a rescue, round two rescue may not look anything like that. So be very conscious of, what breeds out of that first rescue did you like? What kind of traits did you like? Follow the trail of what worked well and what you enjoyed to try to carry over to your second, your third, your fourth dog versus just saying, oh, I'm going to go back and rescue again because it worked out well the first time.
Yeah, getting back to the golden puppy, our neighbors across the street have a golden puppy who's now a year at least, probably about a year old now. And they had a heck of a time with the pulling. The dog was a real happy dog, but pulling and jumping and just over-exuberant. And they're seniors. They're an older couple. Their kids are long gone. And it was really this puppy was giving them a run for their money. And the Goldens tend to have a higher pain tolerance. They started in a harness. They were doing a lot of positive training. It wasn't getting them over the hump. But, that the high pain tolerance, it's a double-edged sword. It's great with young kids, and it's great because they're not going to be as reactive as opposed to a more nervy dog that, we've talked about in the past, where you accidentally step on their paw and they might turn and bite your ankle or something, or, they just overreact, overly sensitive at the vet, overly sensitive, fit to physical touch and sensation, whereas the Goldens are little more bulletproof. But at the same time, when you're training them to not pull on a leash, sometimes they require a little more correction.
Yeah, and it was just becoming a safety hazard with them like trailing behind the dog and this dog acting like a sled dog. All right, let's go to break super quick. And when we get back, we're going to talk more about your round ones versus your round twos.
Want to keep up with all the latest from the Quirky Dog podcast like me and Murphy here? Then make sure you head on over to the YouTube channel and subscribe. Or if you prefer to listen to the madness, go on over to iTunes or Spotify and follow the Quirky Dog podcast. And hey, while you're there, leave a rating and review and let them know what you think of the show. Until then, keep it quirky.
So, we got a hard stop. We're back. So when we were talking about this, I guess the biggest factor typically is the kids. And it's either that, you were a young couple and you didn't have kids, at first when you were training your dog, and then maybe you had kids when the dog was older and trained like this family was, or, Scott sees a lot of people who have always had dogs in the house with kids, and now the kids have gone away to college and they only come home for Thanksgiving and Christmas, and it's a totally different vibe. So I guess that's sometimes the biggest environmental difference that people face, but it's important to look at that with a critical eye and be objective and realize, okay, yeah, it's absolutely chaotic now to try to do a young puppy with two little kids in the house. We totally see the difference. And vice versa, you don't want to spoil the dog like crazy just because now your adult kids have, gone off to college or moved out of the house or anything else, because you'll see a big behavior change in the dogs and how they act based on how you treat them.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing I see, with the round twos, a lot of people that I come in contact with, is the dogs today are having a lot more anxiety than the first dog they had 20 years ago. And sometimes it's the same breed, and they can't understand it. It's a big problem. And I ask them, well, what was the living situation with the first dog? And both parents are working, kids are at school, the dog spent a lot of time alone at home. And as much as they loved the dog wasn't the center of attention. There was just too much going on in the house for the dog to be the center of attention. And now the kids are gone. The parents are retired or semi-retired or working from home. And so they're with this dog 24/7. The dog is just leaning against them all waking hours. And now all of a sudden they have separation anxiety. Surprise.
Yeah.
And it's hard to get this through to people sometimes, because emotionally the people quite often feel that neediness to have that dog next to them as well. I mean, maybe because they're empty nesters, the kids are gone or whatever, they feel more of a need to have companionship.
And they like to care for something, right? They love to be loved, and they love doting upon something. Everybody wants to be needed. It feels good, especially once your kids have left. I mean, that's a whole vibe that you're not feeling anymore. Mom, dad, as much as it's difficult as they're growing up, once they're off and they're independent, you miss that someone has to rely on you. So in a sense, they love when the dog is like that, but you don't want to make the dog nuts in the meantime. That's not a healthy situation. Another big change we see is having a yard versus not. And I think nowadays it seems more common to just, get a place where you have a fenced-in yard and everything else. But if you guys were young and living in the city dogs just automatically have better leash manners. They have to. You're taking them out on leash all the time to go to the bathroom 3 to 4 times a day minimum. And, you have bad weather. They can't be pulling, on ice and knocking you down. They're just very accustomed to having good leash manners.
And I will say they're also very desensitized to a lot of stimulus, because they see everything every day. They come out the door, there's cars, trucks, people that don't care about them, just life going on.
Yeah.
A lot of dogs have a really hard time that live in a more rural environment. They walk down the street, they might see a squirrel, they see nothing. But then when one person comes down the road, they go friggin' crazy.
It's a big surprise.
Over one person.
And it's convenient to have a yard. It's great to have a yard. We have a little potty yard, but there's nothing more that I like than being able to, let dogs out and roam around acres, and they're all fenced in and they're safe. It's awesome. But it takes the responsibility of that leash training and everything off of you guys. So I would just harp that, if you have gone to a situation where you're more hands off, it is still great to put a leash on that dog, walk him back and forth to the mailbox. Don't just put the dog on a leash when you need to go to the vet or you need to take him to the groomer or something else, and get them out and about, expose them. Like Scott is saying, this is such a huge, huge component. In Maine, there's a lot of very remote places, a lot of places around New England. New Hampshire, Vermont, everything else. You can live out where you don't see people for days, if not weeks, depending on where you live. You have to actually infuse field trips into your dog's socialization. And I say dog because even if they're past puppyhood, if you get a rescue in your house or, you get a hand-me-down dog from a friend or family member, even if they're a year old, they need to get out, they need to have exposure, they need to learn about these things, and that gives them more confidence to live. So that's another situation sometimes we see, like, oh, well, we were living in the city and, now we live in the suburbs and we have 4 acres. That's awesome. But that doesn't necessarily mean that takes the responsibility off you guys for leash training and structured walks and everything else.
Yeah, you want to try to incorporate some structure into the dog's life. The other thing is the crating comes up quite often where they never crated their first dog. So we never used a crate before. Why do we got to use a crate? But their lives were totally different then. A lot of times with the yard, the dog was outside for 10 or 12 hours a day.
Yeah.
The dog was just out in the yard all day, and came in and ate, and but it was just a whole different lifestyle.
And when you're away from the house, when you have a full-time job and you're gone for at least 8 hours a day, maybe the dog isn't crated, but there's separation between the two of you. The dog still has downtime. The dog still has alone time and everything else. So especially with these work from home situations, this is kind of like a new phenomenon that really kind of expanded since COVID. You have to infuse this time alone through the crate for the dogs. And if you're the kind of person that's like, I want to use a bedroom or I want to use a bathroom, fine, try that out, but separation is key. Nothing is less healthy than a dog that follows you around the house every moment of the day. A lot of these apartment complexes now, you only have to go down a few floors. You can eat some food. You can grab some small groceries sometimes. You just go right back up the elevator. You barely have to leave the walls that you live in, but then the dog is going to be freaking completely inconsolable the first time that, you have to go to a wedding or you want to have a long weekend away and a house sitter come in. It's really important that the dog is accustomed to its alone time. And if you're home with the dog all the time, you need to create that alone time. It's so super important. And it's one of the only ways we know how to combat anxiety. We say it time and time again.
Yeah, and getting to that apartment situation we're talking about, if your dog has any kind of territorial aggression, it expands from your little apartment to the entire complex. These dogs get reactive. First, they're reactive if someone walks by your apartment door. They hear someone walk by, they bark. Then you go out into the hallway, and then someone's coming up the stairs. They go crazy about that. Now, it could be a 100-unit building. No matter where you are, if it hears something, it's blowing up left and right.
It's all its house. Yeah, and that's an important component to mention as we're kind of evaluating, your first round with a dog versus your second. If you had some problem behaviors your first round, you need to be very conscious about how you're going to target those differently the next time around. It happens time and time again, and, no offense to any of our clients or anything else, but they'll say oh yeah, my last dog guarded me like this too. Oh yeah, the last dog was, super territorial. Now we're talking different breeds, different periods of time, different places that you lived. My last dog was super destructive. My last dog was super clingy. If there were things, and I know it's hard to look back and think about things that you dislike of a dog that you've lost because you normally just miss that dog and all the memories are just great and that dog was the best thing ever. But if there were things you didn't like, if there were behavioral things that you didn't like, you want to sure as heck put as much stake as possible into making sure those behaviors are not created within the next dog. Because inadvertently, sometimes those things just trickle down the line, and pretty soon now you've owned, 3 or 4 dogs that are biting people and reactive on leash, and not a pleasant situation. Not how you want your rounds to look as you progress.
And like you said about not wanting to maybe address certain things or think about certain things. A lot of people tell me, oh, my first dog was nothing like this.
Yeah.
My first dog was, perfect dog. And we all block out a lot of all the negatives. We just forget. And the thing is, it's natural if you have a dog for 10 years, the puppyhood stuff is only 6 months to a year. So the first year might have been a nightmare, and then you got 8, maybe 10 years of really pretty good quality companionship with that dog. You don't remember the first year. That's gone.
Yeah.
Now you got this little puppy in front of you that's a friggin' pain in the ass. And you're like, my last dog wasn't like this. And I have to start asking really pointed questions. And then the wife will say, oh, no, honey, remember it ate the leather couch and we had to reupholster half the living room. And, oh, yeah, they forget. But, it's just...
Time heals.
Yeah. That's why we have more children. You start getting a good night's sleep and think, oh, that wasn't that bad. But
Scott had 9 years of diapers in his fatherhood, so there was a lot of children going on there.
But no, you just puppies are not easy for anybody, whether you're young or old. It's a lot of responsibility. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of getting up in the middle of the night and rushing to the vet because, like, Jess's dog ate an earring once. Hey, look at my puppy. And the dog ate an earring off her girlfriend's ear. It's like, oh my God, just freaking out about little things,
Puppies they're a lot of work. They're not easy. It's like 24/7. You have to be dealing with them. Yeah. And I guess our biggest advice for you guys, if you're listening and you either have an elderly dog and you're thinking about what you want to do for the next dog you get, or you've lost a dog and you're kind of in this in-between area of should we get a dog, should we not? First and foremost, focus on health. If you got your dog from a breeder, and oftentimes those breeders are no longer breeding. At some point, the people that trained with us, we will no longer be training. Like, obviously, there's this natural course of life where, people evolve, people retire from their professions and everything else. So if you do not have that same breeder that you can reference, or that breeder now is across the country or whatever else, search for health. You want health testing. You want to be able to meet the parents. You want sound temperaments. All of these things, first and foremost, matter. And especially in a breed like Golden's, where osteosarcoma is going crazy, hemangiosarcoma is going crazy, hip dysplasia is so prevalent. There's no guarantee your dog isn't going to get cancer, but you can see at least 3 years of lineage where, they all tested well with their hips and everything else. You want these breeders to be doing genetic testing. Embark gives us, great things to look at now. Paw print genetics, there's a bunch of genetic tests you can go through, but that is the number one thing. Focus on health. And if you are getting a rescue or something else again, don't just look and get the same dog because it looks the same. I promise you, one white dog is very different than another white dog, okay? Just because there is a similar eye patch or something else, it's about the breeds, it's about the history of that dog, and everything else that matters way more so than what the dog looked like. And honestly, sometimes it's harder when the dog just constantly reminds you of your old dog. Sometimes it's good if you had a white dog, get a brown dog the next time. Switch it up. But make sure that you are able to meet the dog. Don't try to overcompensate for what is lacking in a rescue that you may see. Don't try to make excuses for why a breeder won't invite you into their home, or they won't disclose, lines that they've produced for years and years and years. They won't give you at least a list of 6 to 10 references. This is just commonplace. Even if you just breed 2 litters a year, this is commonplace that an ethical breeder should have these things in place. AKC papers are not the most important thing anymore. Trust me.
No, I'd be, even over the references, I'd want to see the parents of the puppy that you're going to be hopefully getting. And if it's a new breed to you, and Jess is talking about all this health stuff, research the breed first to find out what all the health weaknesses are in that specific breed. Because just because it may have, they're prone to cancer and they're prone to hip dysplasia, as examples, it doesn't mean you can't get one that has or the heart issues. A lot of dogs have heart issues. So the breeders of these particular breeds know this as well, and they're trying to make sure that they can breed that stuff out or not have it come into their puppies. So there's certain tests that they should be doing, that they should be excited to show you. Yes, we do the heart test, and we do this and we do that. And they know that doing all that doesn't guarantee anything, but they're doing the best they can to produce a decent puppy so that they can better the breed and get some good dogs out there. So you want to check that stuff. And a lot of people that I have met over the years, their emotions overtake them. They walk by a pet store that has dogs in the window.
One looked like a Doberman.
They will pick the most pathetic dog in the window because they feel like they tell me I rescued the dog from a pet store because it was
$1,500 for the rescue. Yeah,
you know what I mean. But what people don't realize, and if that's your mission in life, is to rescue, sick dogs with genetic problems, then that's the life you've chosen. But I mean, it's a long life. It's a lot of headache. It's very expensive. You could spend tens of thousands of dollars on a puppy and trying to keep them as well as they possibly can be. So, I'm thinking of it on the front end a little more logically, clinically, not emotionally, because I know once I get the dog, once I get the puppy, and even that, I shouldn't even say me, but when people get a puppy, that's it. It doesn't matter if that puppy comes with one eye missing and a broken leg. We're keeping this puppy and we're going to nurse it back to health.
Yeah.
So think about that stuff.
Do your
because-
research on the front end. It will save you a lot of time on the other end. And if you're getting a dog, a brand new dog, get insurance. If it's a puppy, if it's a rescue, get insurance. All right, we hope that we brought you more joy this week than last week's Behavioral Euthanasia podcast with the little golden puppy. She's very well behaved, but she was too squirmy to be in our laps the whole time. Thank you so much for joining us this week. If you have any questions, feel free to reach us at studio@thequirkydog.com. And in the meantime, keep it quirky. Bye, guys.
The views and opinions expressed by the hosts, guests, or callers of this program do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe, the United Podcast Network, its partners, or affiliates.